Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to lead you all through this discussion today. My name is Kori Hamilton Biagas. I'm a communications manager with SRI. We have two very distinguished guests with us. Suzanne Donovan is the founding executive director of the SERP Institute, an education research and development partnership organization incubated at the National Academy of Sciences. She has led numerous problem-solving research practice partnerships that have generated more than a dozen open education resources that have spread nationwide, such as Word Generation, an academic language program, and Starry, a reading program that is part of the Learn Network. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you. Good to be here, Kori.
And we have our very own Vanessa Coleman. She serves as the co-director of SRI's Center for Education Research and Innovation and specializes in designing equity-focused frameworks to inform organizational structures, systems, processes, and practices. At SRI, she leads several efforts to integrate equity drivers into our research and technical assistance to states, districts, schools, and partnering organizations. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you, Kori.
Thank you both for joining us today. I want to talk with you about some of the challenges that come when trying to scale innovations that involve real systemic level type of change. We know from our experience that convenience is extremely important to users when selecting educational products and programs, meaning that they want things that can fit into systems that they already have in place and procedures and processes in place. And this may be especially true with all of this post-pandemic stress that education agencies are experiencing on a micro level, from that interpersonal classroom attendance, getting people there, to, teacher shortages, up to that more macro policy level of how do we help our children get to grade level again? How do we close some of that gap? And then we also know that simply adopting a more effective solution while leaving those existing structures in place and those existing policies in place won't really disrupt the inequities. We've been seeing that for decades, time and time again. And so that leads us to this conversation. And, how can solutions that require really deep change gain adoption and be adapted to be scalable? Suzanne, may I start with you?
Sure. I guess I would frame it slightly differently to say, how do we get the disruptive outcomes we're looking for, the disruption in patterns that lead to inequity, without disrupting what teachers are professionally doing, how they're leading their professional lives. So more than convenience, I think. So if we think personally about ourselves, right? So a doctor might say, I would be healthier, and I care about being healthy. I would be healthier if I got up from my desk every hour and walked around for 5 minutes. And if I had no screen time for 2 hours before bed. And if on really busy days, I didn't have those Amy's organic enchiladas for lunch, microwave, right? And all of those things are true. And I do want to be healthier. But it's not, I would feel like if somebody said, yeah, you're just doing what's convenient, I would want to say, well, you need to contextualize that. I'm living at a challenging professional life, right? And those days when I reach for the frozen enchiladas, I have 5 minutes for lunch and that's it. And getting up every hour would be a good idea, but I just am desperate for those chunks of time that are uninterrupted. And so many things come at me during a day that I'm not going to get myself up and walk around for 5 minutes when I need that time. So I think what we need to think about teachers in that way. They're leading really challenging professional lives. And as you say, especially post-pandemic, they're dealing with challenging situations, and they develop routines to get through those situations in a way that allows them to have a reasonable professional life and personal life, and that balance between the two. So I think we don't want to think that they're looking for convenience as much as they're holding together a lot. And the more time I've spent in classrooms, the more I appreciate how much you're holding together as a teacher when you have no idea, but today your teacher across the hall was sick. You now have a whole nother class being integrated into yours. The number of things that come up that take control away from teachers is they're just regular. They're unpredictable, but they happen frequently. So we need to ask, how do we allow teachers to maintain their routines and at the same time come up with slightly different patterns that disrupt an inequity? It's not disrupting their lives so much, but it disrupts an inequity.
I definitely appreciate that framing. And I think it just sets up the conversation so beautifully around equity because it has to be contextualized. And so starting your response by contextualizing even what convenience means is very important when we're thinking about how we're supporting educators in disrupting inequities and implementing solutions that can be scaled.
Yeah.
So Vanessa, what is your perspective around the way in which we can move these things to a scalable place when we're focusing on solutions that require the deep change and the disruptions and the real life experiences and factors that our educators, administrators, and policymakers are kind of in the trenches and involved with daily?
I really appreciate the disruption language that Suzanne has shared. To add on to that, I'd offer, right, that it's crucial to engage those invested folks, right, whether they're educators, policy folks, or parents, right? It's important to engage them in the conversation about both understanding the problem and then when we get to design, right? I think that in doing that and engaging them, the key might be to demonstrate the tangible benefits, right, of these transformative programs, not just in terms of, for example, teacher practice, which we all focus on, right? But also ways in which they interact, those teacher practices, right? Because those teacher practices, they're tried and true in those environments. Teachers have come to them, right, intentionally. They are strategic, right? But how do those practices interact with other parts of an educational system, right? We must consider, are there structures in place and required practices in place that make it difficult or unlikely for a program or a practice to succeed? I think it's important for us to take a broader look at understanding the context, climate, and culture, right, in which our efforts exist. And also building a compelling narrative around the success stories and the potential long-term impacts can significantly drive, I think, long-term buy-in, right? As you're engaging them, their perspectives and their voice, you've got to paint the picture, right? One of the things I'm sure we'll talk about as we keep going in the conversation is how you engage them over time and what that looks like, and what do you gain overall, right? You don't just gain perspective about long-term impact or how to implement something, but you gain lots of perspective about the context in which it exists. That you're designing for. You gain lots of perspective about the complexities of the environment for sustainability and scalability over time.
I appreciate all of what you're saying and the direction that you are going around the developers understanding some of the purpose for why they need to get at the context of the environment they're trying to support, and why it's crucial for developers and researchers to communicate back the value of what they're doing to the people they are doing it with, for, and on behalf of and around. And that takes us to this place of, when we're thinking about this as from the perspective of a developer, of a researcher, where do you start in trying to gain this buy-in for transforming programs and practices? Like, where do you begin, Suzanne?
Yeah, you can tell I'm ready I'm chomping at the bit, right? I think you begin in schools and classrooms. You begin by listening. One of the biggest mistakes is for developers to develop solutions to problems that teachers don't feel like they have. And then the push to get it adopted, and why doesn't it scale? Because you've solved the problem you think is a problem, not the problem they think is a problem. So I would say from the get-go, the problem needs to be understood in terms of the life that teachers are living, their experience of what they need help with. That opens the door. And I would echo Vanessa's comment that teachers need to feel invested. And a key way they feel invested is that you've asked them to begin with what the problem is. But that takes us, Kori, back to your initial question. So doesn't that create a situation in which you can't create major change? And I think the answer to that is not necessarily. It takes design skill to figure out how to take the problem that a teacher is expressing they have, and figure out how to design a solution that both addresses their problem and opens up the door to deeper, not disruptive of teachers' lives, but deeper change in students' experience. And you mentioned at the opening word generation, and I can give you an example of how exactly that played out. If you're ready for
Please
example.
share. I'm ready. Yes.
Okay. So with the word generation program, we began listening to teachers in the Boston Public Schools. The superintendent told us that, kids were getting to high school and they couldn't comprehend their textbooks. Teachers were reading textbooks to them. He said, we need to do something in the middle grades, and we don't know what. And we did a lot of listening, and teachers told us that as students got into the more disciplinary texts, the more dense texts, they didn't have the stamina. And they thought a big part of the reason was that they didn't know too much of the vocabulary. So they wanted a vocabulary program. So how do you take a vocabulary program and try to make disruptive change, right? That's a challenge. But the thing is that most teachers understood the point we made right out of the gate, that if students are going to master vocabulary, they need to hear those words and read those words in context, in multiple contexts, so they get a feeling for the nuance of the meaning. And they need to use those words, right, in speaking and in writing.
Yes.
So what if you take the context for using those words, create a passage that has a controversial topic at its center, and you present at least two sides of the topic with evidence or arguments to support both. So then the question has no right answer. So disruption one. The teacher can't tell the student the right answer because there isn't a right answer. Students get to decide, using their own critical reasoning skills, what position they take. Disruption two, students' voice matters. And then in making arguments, students have a different experience of themselves. You see, I remember so clearly going into a Boston classroom and a young man who came in and slumped down on his desk and put his head down. And it was like, you knew the last thing he wanted was to be in school, right? But the question was, how much should we get to know about candidates running for office? And how important is a violation made in the past to whether you vote for somebody presently? And that young man sort of slowly picked his head up. And the teacher, you could see the surprise in her eyes when he raised his hand. And he said, well, if that candidate smoked marijuana when he was 18 years old, I'm going to say that's a past discretion that doesn't matter today. But if he smoked marijuana last week, then in my judgment, he's breaking the law. And if he thinks it's okay to break the law, I'm not voting for him. So in that moment, he gets to be with the teacher, not the person who she's wondering what he's going to do wrong, right? She's admiring the fact that he's making that distinction about when the transgression was committed and why that matters. So teachers have a different experience of students, right? They see students as having much more depth in their thinking than they ever thought.
Disruption number 3.
Right. Absolutely. It changes the relationship and it changes what students think, what teachers think students are capable of. And that is a major third disruption. The key in the design was this program can be done in 15 minutes a day. And the routine every week is exactly the same. Launch passage on Monday, math problem on Tuesday, science on Wednesday, debate on Thursday, taking a stand essay Friday. Once the teacher has it down, it is so routine. And they'll say that's what they love about it. They know what to expect week after week. So if you can get something to become a habit and to fit in the routine of the day, you're there. If students have a positive experience, that makes their relationship to teachers better, and the teacher wants that. So it's a major disruption. It's a minor change in the teacher's day. It doesn't mean that she or he or they don't have a routine. They still can keep a routine, but it makes a major difference.
That is a really excellent, concrete example, not only of like the critical importance of centering equity around design and the importance of centering the need of the person who's going to be implementing the solution first, but also how there are very critical places where disruptions are taking place that are intentional, right? These disruptions did not happen by accident. They were intentionally integrated into the design of a lesson that could take place in 15 minutes.
Right. Without disrupting the teacher's life.
Disrupting the teacher's life and rhythm.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that leads me to wonder, in creating a solution that way that has some clear places of how it is shifting perception and behavior for students, teachers, administrators, what are some of the risks or consequences of not doing what you're describing, of not centering equity, of not centering the needs of the practitioners and the educators first? What are the in our design process? What are some of the consequences of those outcomes? Vanessa, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really appreciate that very tangible example. I think that the consequences can be profound, right? When we are proceeding with our design work kind of agnostic to context, to climate and culture, or another way to put it, to lived experiences, right? That's what Suzanne is describing. we and our work just perpetuate existing disparities, right? Further marginalizing specific communities that have that constant experience. And this oversight can lead to solutions that are not fully inclusive, resulting in one-size-fits-all approaches that fail to meet the diverse needs that are out there, right? And it also misses the opportunity to leverage diverse perspectives and experiences, which can enrich the learning environment for everyone. So I think the consequences are quite significant when we miss them. One of the ways in which we do this sometimes when we're not focused on things like specific teacher practices is we might use things like empathy practices, like empathy interviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
Schools, teachers might define a challenge. The challenge might be a learning outcome challenge, which has a connection to an environmental challenge, where teachers might define, school leaders might define the issue as students don't care. They're not invested, right? We hear this all the time. And I think, the older learners are, the more likely we are to blame them sometimes for their experiences and the outcomes that we're getting with them. And when we adopt practices like empathy practices that help us understand context, lived experiences, what's going on, we better design to real need.
Mm-hmm. And just a side note, as a middle school and high school teacher formerly, those children are magical.
Absolutely.
And they will rise up to your expectations, whatever they are. And so yes, our older kids are their kids. That's the part I feel like we don't want to forget when we're designing solutions for supporting their learning and their growth, is that they are still children. Yeah. And even though they occupy bigger bodies, they're still children, and they need all of that empathy and compassion and support, because I say all the time about my two, they're 3 and 2 years old. I'm like, they just got here. They only know what they have had exposure to in the 2-3 years that they've been here. And the same thing is true with our children in school. It's like, they know what we are giving them. They know what we're supporting them through. They know what we're teaching them. And even though they're 17 years old, I'm 41 years old, they just got here.
Perspective.
In some ways, I think that's true. Like, we don't want to forget that they're still on a developmental trajectory.
Absolutely.
And they're pretty early. On the other hand, I think we don't want to underestimate what they're capable of.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
How extraordinary they can be when they are given the opportunity to show what they can do. And not, I think, critically important, not to meet other people's expectations, but to take ownership of their own learning and develop expectations for themselves. That's where you just see students absolutely soar.
Yeah.
And when given the opportunity, right, to be heard, right, to explore their own capacities and abilities, and the application of their lived experiences, they'll always rise to the occasion. Right. In processes and practices like empathy, interviewing, right, and centering empathy as a clear method of understanding can help create that environment and that tone.
Absolutely. So, Vanessa, I know that you've worked really extensively with collaborative partnerships designed to increase educational and social learning opportunities, and that really hone in on historically marginalized or disenfranchised communities. So how would you advise developers to engage in these kinds of partnerships as they are doing this context setting and understanding? That doesn't happen in a vacuum. And we also recognize that our school communities are sometimes tight-knit.
Yeah.
And so if you have not taken the time to really show up for them in a support role before an extract role, then these partnerships become absolutely essential, because that's where the trust is. So how would you advise a developer to engage in these kind of partnerships and identify them?
one of the ways in which I think we can shift how we begin much of our considerations for need for design of tools and practices is by starting with self and the ways in which we as designers think about the issues, right? The direct issues that we've defined, but also if we step back, right? What's feeding our perceptions and understandings of those direct issues? So I'll say that as one kind of overarching way of readying ourselves for engaging kind of invested perspectives into a design process, right?
Because as much as we would like to be neutral, we are not.
We are not. That's really important, right?
Right.
And, I often talk about liberatory design. I didn't create it, but I really appreciate it, right? As a tool that can help us both address the important considerations of design, starting with designer mindsets, which oftentimes just might disrupt an assumption like, I am the only one that can design, right? There are other people who can join me in this design process who themselves can be and are designers in their own right. And then the other side of that liberatory design perspective, right, is then the process that we use, which is about what we've been talking about, engaging those perspectives and those voices, those lived experiences. So I think these partnerships bring together diverse expertise and perspectives, fostering innovative solutions that are most likely to be embraced by communities that are served, right? When we don't, we run the risk of not even understanding fully, right? I mean, we've been talking a lot about that. They also provide, I think, a perspective or a support network for navigating the complexities of an environment, right? I think I said this before, that we better understand the context in which we're trying to influence or impact when we have other perspectives that represent that context, right? Or have participated in different kinds of ways. So to engage effectively, I think developers, designers should focus on building genuine, mutually beneficial relationships that start with the assumption that I'm not the only one who can design.
Yeah, and I agree with Vanessa, and I would just add that if you're going in thinking that you know what you want to do, and the question is, can I enter a partnership and persuade people that they also want to do what I want to do? That gets snipped out right away.
Right.
I mean, you need to go in with a genuine curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, I think what's worked well is we're not committed to a specific type of solution. As an organization, we pull in researchers with all different backgrounds as needed. So the flexibility of going where the district is looking to go and responding to the needs that teachers express and genuinely trying to figure out, thinking we don't have the answers.
Right.
They wouldn't put a problem on the table if it was an easy one to solve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they completely understand when you're genuine in your curiosity and when you're trying to learn from them as much as you're trying to share what you know with them. So that mutuality, I think, is essential. It's not needed in every situation. If you do that well with a community, then the solution you come up with is likely to work for a whole lot of other places that have the same problem. But it really is with that design experience, getting to know that situation really well and listening and developing the mutual process of refining your thinking and your development strategy.
Yeah, thank you for that addition. And that leads me to just continue down this road, Suzanne, and ask, what are some specific strategies that you all have used at SERP in developing products that and programs that scale and advance equity? So you gave that example, which was beautiful. And are there other kind of strategies that you all have engaged in that have kind of demonstrated a similar outcome and with that focus on equity and disruptors?
Yeah. So there are a few things, a few strategies. First is to focus on equity, we make sure we're working with districts and schools that where students have been marginalized and underserved. So right there, once you're committed to going in and listening, understanding the nature of the problem, designing with the needs of users in mind, then you're sort of centering equity. So the first thing is where you do the work. Second, we try to figure out how to make what we're asking any teacher or set of students to do routine enough that we're not imposing a huge learning burden.
Yes.
And to the extent possible, it's not always possible, but to the extent possible, creating the opportunity for teachers and students to learn to get better at the thing you're asking them to do as they do it. I think the idea that you're going to design something that is going to take a teacher, tons of time up front, 2-week institute, read as a science curriculum that's recently been developed has asked. They give students a unit of 20 pages and they give the teacher 500 pages to read before using those 20 pages. And, to give students a really rich experience, which I think they have done a good job of designing for that purpose. Teachers have to know so much that it's unrealistic.
Yes.
So one of the things we've really tried to focus on is how do we create change? For example, the Word Generation program that I mentioned. At the end of the passage, the launch passage, there's the question, what do you think? So we don't have to change the teacher's mindset. We don't have to spend, an institute persuading them that listening to students is important. We structured the question, right? What do you think? So the teacher's using the curriculum, turns the question over, and then bit by bit comes to understand students differently and understand the value of listening to students and how much the challenge level drops when students are your partners in learning rather than, antagonists because they would rather be doing anything but what you're asking them to do. So we want to design experiences that don't ask for so much up front, but allow for learning as you go. The third, I think, critical feature of all of our design is to think about the fact that nobody likes to be told what to do, right? And so much of what we assume we have to do with students is tell them what to do. And I really learned from exceptional teachers that when you take away that directive, you completely change the dynamic. We are working right now on a project that I'm just so enthusiastic about with the DC public schools. And we're working in Ward 7 and 8. They're the lowest income areas of the district. And we spent, I personally was in classrooms for about 100 hours observing and seeing what's happening differently in those pockets where students are doing really well and how that differs from what's going on elsewhere. And what those teachers have figured out is how to give students agency and ownership and how in just the simplest ways to reduce the number of orders they're giving to students. And there is a classroom. We clocked the number of times the teacher stopped to make a behavior correction. In a couple of classrooms, it was as high as 72 times in the two hours that we were there.
Wow.
We had 2 classrooms in which it was 0. So the question is, what are those things that are going on in those classrooms? So we had a teacher whose classroom we put a swivel camera in. So we would be capturing her practice right from day one. And, she wants students to come in and put their stuff in a locker and not throw it on the floor and not push and shove like any other teacher. But what she does is she lets the students gather, and she said, now we have to think about how we're going to come into the classroom. So I want you all to see what I'm going to do. And she goes out into the hall and she skips in and sort of pushes her way through and takes the backpack and throws it on the floor near the lockers and then goes to sit down. And the students yell, no, you can't do that. And she says, well, I guess I can. I just did. No, you can't. Well, why can't I? And they tell her, that's not okay. Somebody could trip on that. And somebody doesn't know where that belongs because you just threw it on the floor. And so she says, well, so what are you trying to say to me? And the kids are saying, well, you have to be safe. So the kids are saying that's not okay. So she then asked the kid to come in. She actually had 3 kids come in and demonstrate how they would do it. So they do. Kids know, right? They know to come in, to walk quietly, hang up their stuff. And they did. So it's theirs, right? She does that at every turn, and her kids are leading the morning meeting by mid-year. Half of the class is reading at the end of the year in kindergarten, reading fluently. It's just remarkable, and 0 behavior corrections. So what we're trying to do is figure out how, in the word generation kind of mode, how to get that understanding that when students have ownership of their behavior, when you stop telling them constantly what you want them to do and create the interest on their part in doing it, it changes everything. So we're really trying to design for getting the practices in teachers' repertoire that support that.
Wow. I can envision that as a practitioner. And that goes back to something that you both brought up earlier about centering the experiences of the educator, right? By being in the classroom for that number of hours and seeing the discrete behaviors that the teacher is demonstrating and how those generate different kinds of responses among students. And then it connects to that idea that you aren't the only designer, that they're contributing to the design because they are modeling the behaviors that you need to integrate into the design that you can then scale for other teachers to learn and grow from.
Right. And in that case, the design really is to capture their practice, because teachers say, with hands down, the most effective way for them to change their practice is to see exactly what other teachers are doing with students who are the age of the kids they're teaching and who look like the kids they're teaching. And so the intervention that these micro-credentialing courses we're creating feature the teachers who are engaged in these practices. It's nothing we're coming up with. It's sharing what those teachers have come up with.
Yeah, that's extremely exciting. And I'm looking forward to that product coming out.
I am too.
And so right now we're in this place, there's a lot happening in our world, right? Where it's post-pandemic-ish, and we have tensions happening, and there are some places that are really fighting hard to secure certain kinds of academic access. Some are trying to disrupt academic access to students around particular topics. And so what feels like our biggest opportunities for scaling and integrating equity policies and practices in this environment, and what feel like some of our biggest challenges that we're facing in that effort? Vanessa, may I start with you with that question?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
It's a heavy question, right? Because we're all we're all trying to make our way, right, in this current context, which is in many ways very different from pre-COVID context, right? There are many similarities, but man, have we highlighted, kind of shined a bright light on certain things. And there are ways in which we're engaging with each other that makes you wonder, how do I respond? Which way do I go? I think that the current educational landscape, despite its challenges, presents significant opportunities for scaling equitable policies and programs. I think one of the key opportunities lies in the growing awarenesses that we all have, even if you don't know exactly where you stand, right? You know that these issues are out there, they're important, and people are talking about it, right? So this growing awareness and dialogue around social justice and equity issues is real. And our kids, our students, our learners are in it as well. And so to think that we can go on as we maybe did before, right? Business as usual, not engage students or provide students with opportunities to engage with the challenges that they're dealing with every day. Whether they're conversations in their households, conversations in or about their communities, they are engaged in these conversations, in these kind of conflicts often, right? About where we stand or how we stand or if we stand, if we don't stand. So I think the heightened consciousness can be leveraged to garner support for transformative educational practices. I think it's quite powerful, right? Educational kind of fodder, right? That we've got right now. I think additionally, the rapid advancement of technology post-COVID, right, provides an unprecedented opportunity, right, to develop and implement innovative, inclusive educational tools and platforms that could reach a wider audience. You know, as we talk about AI, right, we were not talking about AI much before the pandemic, but it's all we can all think about right now, right? Both impacts, positive, negative. How do we leverage it, right, to get the important work done? How should students be allowed to engage and use it, right? Can they handle, right, the power of it all? So I think, I don't know, I think that the focus should be on harnessing these opportunities to create educational experiences that are not only accessible, but also equitable and responsive to the needs of our diverse learners, with deep consideration for socio-political contexts and climates directly impacting them, right? Social justice, I think, has to be part of the conversation about how we school. It's leverageable content, right? There's so much to build from it. And we can build it in every single educational kind of content, right, that students are exposed to, right? It doesn't just belong in our civic conversations, at least not anymore. We can easily find ways in which we can talk about the impacts of social justice, social inequities, and the dilemmas that we're all facing in just about every context, from math and science, right, to arts.
Susan, Suzanne, I'm sorry, where do you see some of these big opportunities and challenges? I do want to hear about some of the challenges because that's real also. We have barriers that are also inhibiting our ability to advance in a rapid way, to really harness the energy that is kind of groundswelling. There are roadblocks, and that's real.
Yeah. And it's not the same everywhere, right? So
Correct.
we have programs that were used in some states that are no longer used in those states because we include a novel, for example, in Starry that a state has banned. So we're not going to design to satisfy everyone. Many companies try to do that because they're maximizing their sales, but that's not what we do. So we accept that there are some places that are not going to be enthusiastic about our products. What I think is the biggest opportunity for scaling the kinds of innovations that we develop is to make sure that they have a demonstrable impact.
Mhm.
So the program that right now is picking up distribution most quickly is our Starry Adolescent Reading Program, which is part of the Learn Network. And I think the reason is that it has tier 1 evidence of support. So if you use it and use it well, there's pretty clear evidence that you're going to have an impact. And that makes a big difference. Then the question is, how do you get that impact? And first of all, you have to give students access to rigorous content. And when you're talking about schools that have underserved populations, often they're not getting access to rigorous content. So even while we're teaching foundational reading skills, we're giving them things to read and topics to discuss and fluency passages that deal with things that are interesting social dilemmas. So giving them rigorous content, promoting agency. So even though it's a remedial program, students work in partners with each other and measure their own progress in fluency. It's not something the teacher's doing. They're doing it together. They really encourage each other. We give them novels that have authors and characters that are people who look like them. And that makes a big difference in how engaged they'll be. And engagement feeds success.
Yes.
So, and then you have to provide teachers with the level of support they need to be successful with the program. So those are the three things we try to do. They all support equity. They make a big difference to students who are used to thinking of themselves as behind and dissociate from school. And then in this context, they develop much more positive academic identities. So that's where I think equity really takes off, because students, once they have that experience, they take it on their own and run with it. So getting the program to be effective means addressing the things that engage students, and then that evidence of effectiveness makes it much more scalable.
And I really appreciate you speaking to students' perception of self as a equity lever or disruptor.
Yep.
And that connects back to what we've been saying around student voice and engagement. But I just want to bring that out to the front, that the students' perception of themselves and their own capabilities around learning is a huge disruptor in our landscape of inequity and outcomes. Because if a student can feel like they can, then they will.
Yes. Yep. And to go all the way back to your opening question, Kori, so how do we change, how do we get systems to change when we're looking for absorbable changes, which usually means small changes? Every change that works towards students getting that sense of self begins to change the system. Mm-hmm. So thinking about changing the whole system can just, leave you twiddling your thumbs. But thinking about how to support students developing a positive academic identity and sense of self and belonging in the academic environment will have systematic effects if we can accomplish it.
Yes, and coupling that with teachers feeling empowered to be able to implement something that helps not only reduce their stress in terms of behavior concerns, but it also bolsters their the academic growth and advancement of the students. So the teachers are also feeling empowered and supported. Like, I can see a change in the people sitting in front of me. How does that's huge for an educator, which then leads up to the administrators who are seeing a difference in the number of referrals that they're getting into the office. They're seeing an increase in test scores, an increase in academic performance. They're seeing an increase in teacher attendance. because now the teachers are more connected and engaged and are having fewer challenges. So then this is something that they take to the other administrators and say, hey, we're doing this in our school. I think you all should try it. We're seeing a shift in the culture of our school building. Maybe this is something we should try in the whole district. And now we're beginning to see the systems impact.
Right.
And it all started with listening to the problem from the people closest to the problem.
Yeah. And I would love to just call out this example of that happening in New York City, where, the word generation program that I described to you early on, there was, it's being used in over 100 schools in New York City, but there was a school where the student population had declined from 1,200 to under 200.
Wow.
Proficiency was 6% in math, 9% in science, and in literacy. And the guy who introduced word generation he was responsible for taking these 100 plus schools, and saying, if they're all doing debate in their classrooms, these word generation debates, what if we did a Saturday debate league? And allowed these students who have never been part of regional debate to actually compete. And it turned out to be very successful. So he took over that school that was failing on every measure. And today they have 65% proficiency in both math and reading. And what he did was, on day one, he said to the whole faculty, we're going to do one thing right. We're going to do word generation in every classroom and every student. And then we're going to allow those students who are interested to join the debate league. And we're going to come home with the trophy. And that's going to change how we think of ourselves as a school.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that. They had over 100 students on the debate team. Over 100. And now it's been 6 years. They have competed at a national level. They are running their own debate league for elementary students. And when I interviewed two of these kids at the end, I asked if it changed how they thought of themselves. And this one little boy, who was such an excellent debater, said, well, I was asked that question last year. And what I answered was, I would like to be the second Black president of the United States. And then this other boy, who was an immigrant and debated in Spanish as well as in English, said, well, I thought I'd be a policeman, but I find I really like debate. And now my sights are set on the Supreme Court. So that's systems change. When you change how kids think about what they can do and who they are, there is no more fundamental change than that.
What I appreciate about that story and what Suzanne is describing is it requires a vision of change, right? Which in many ways is hope in a place, right?
Yes.
And when you have a vision of change, and when you've got that vision of change, you get clear about what your trajectory is to that, right? For this particular leader, it was, we're going to focus on this one thing. And that leader saw very clear, proximal and was hoping for some more distal outcomes that would get them there. And here they are 6 years later, right? With 65% proficiency. I think that's impressive. And it speaks to the importance of getting clear about what it is you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, how you're going to do it, and the assumptions you make about what's most important.
Yeah. And at that core is giving students ownership.
Yeah.
So that, it's not just that it's one thing, but it's the thing.
That's right.
That gives them voice and ownership and excites them. And this principal said, I have kids who I would like to assign to strategic reading. Actually, they're using the STARry program, but they want to be part of the debate team. And so they want that period for working on debate. And so I let them do it. And those kids make greater gains in reading and comprehension than kids who go through the remedial course.
Absolutely.
So, when
Yes.
you give students that level of agency and ownership, it just changes everything.
High yielding. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. This has been such a incredible conversation. I feel like we have covered all kinds of corners of the ways that equity can be integrated into really practical design principles, into our thinking around scaling. And the most important thing to keep in mind, I think, is like the children are at the center, right? And we can't forget that while we're off in our ivory towers trying to come up with solutions based on literature reviews and all that kind of stuff. We cannot disconnect ourselves from the people who are at the center and who we're doing this for. And we are doing it for the children, particularly the children who have been most marginalized or disenfranchised, to remind them that this system cares about them and to remind them that they matter and that they can.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that, Kori, is that we also have to think about the teachers, because to get to the students, you have to go through the teachers. And if you think about what you want as the experience for students, but don't take into account what that's going to do to a teacher's life, you'll blow it.
And that's the 20 pages and the 500 pages, right? You're right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Would you all like to share any final thoughts to leave with a developer or researcher as they're beginning their journey to designing solutions with equity in mind? There were so many wonderful takeaways in this conversation. I am looking forward to going back to the transcript and pulling them out for clips. But are there any kind of like last things we just want to, send home, drive home?
I could quickly offer just a couple that I think we have been speaking to. One is that lived experience makes a designer. I think that's an important consideration as we move forward. Another is
say more.
I think we've been talking about it, right? That when we go to those most impacted and we say, or we listen for through our engagements, what matters most? What's not working for you? What do you need? Where are the hurdles? Where are the barriers? You begin to get the kinds of responses that lead to important considerations for design, right? For learning, for teaching practices, for how you create a climate or a culture, right? That is conducive, right? To improvement and change. So lived experience matter. Right. And I think in saying that, one of the things I think we're also, Suzanne is kind of hitting on, which we hear a lot when we talk about designing for equity, is that when we design, right, for the margins, right, we bring forth the voices and the perspectives that are traditionally overlooked. And in doing so, it not only ensures inclusivity, but it often results in solutions that benefit everyone, right? I think that's so important, because when we address the unique challenges that are faced by the margins, we generally uncover universal design truths. And that's where the magic happens, right? And that keeps us from going to the easy answers and the easy solutions.
I would just add to what Vanessa said. I agree with her about lived experience, and it can be harder to execute than you might think. I'm just thinking of a situation in which we were designing. We had a group of researchers, and the problem was Minority Student Achievement Network was asking for help in narrowing the algebra achievement gap. And I was listening for the constraints that the district leaders and the math directors were putting on the table. But we had people at the table who had designed programs. That one was a program in the summer that was really intended to get some student advocates who were sort of thought of as cool kids to kind of work with the teacher to get the class going well. But what we were hearing is we don't want a summer program and an after school program because they go when budgets are cut.
Yeah.
Right.
And there was somebody who had developed an intervention program, and they're saying, we don't want an intervention program. You pull those kids out and you're reinforcing stereotype threat.
Mm-hmm.
We want something that goes on in the classroom. It was so hard for me to get people around that table to hear that.
Oh, yeah.
Because once you think you know how to solve a problem, you think you're hearing what you need to hear for your solution to be the solution, right? So I would just reinforce what Vanessa said about really listening and sort of giving up that sense that you're the one who has the answer, and sort of having the curiosity to learn about how you can design effectively for the context and the people you're designing for.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you both for participating in this conversation. I've learned a lot, and I wish we could talk for 2 more hours, but I will release you back into your ecosystems of leading large organizations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Vanessa, I'm glad we talked on the stage about wanting to have an opportunity to connect and talk further. So I'm glad we got that opportunity.
That's exactly right. And I'm looking forward to creating some more opportunities for us to do that. So that's great.
Yeah, great.